try to look like a professional here. You always look a lot more like you know what you're doing when you're behind a hand tool bench. Is the audio on? Here, domino, domino, domino. Oh, there it is. Durr, right beside where I was looking. I'm having a coffee emergency. I will return shortly. So perhaps the only video that's been more overdone in woodworking on YouTube than this one is how to make a cutting board, but I haven't done this one yet. I'm not sure if I've done the cutting board video either. But anyway, dominoes, dowels, pocket screws, and I don't have a biscuit joiner, which probably states my views on it. I did have one. We're gonna talk about biscuits too, just because that very much fits in this conversation, because in biscuits, there's also the low-end big box biscuits and joiners, and then there's the quality ones, which are much closer in performance to what you can do with a domino, and just a totally different category. So I feel like biscuits need to be addressed, but recognize there's definitely two tiers of biscuit joiners. So anyway, yeah, let's get into the merits of these and their place. And if you haven't joined me before, I'm Caleb from YouCanMakeThisToo. First, let's talk about the one right in front of me, dowels. So why do you use a dowel? Well, a dowel lends strength that has several things going for it. When we're talking about these aids, there's three things that they can possibly do. They can help hold things together, so act as a clamp while glue dries. They can be an alignment aid, and they can add strength. So maybe they add strength, and that's why we're doing it, and they can also aid in alignment, which is like, say we're gluing up a panel like these desktops I have to my right, your left. Right, when I glued all those up, those long grain glue joints making up that top does not need any extra strength. The glue is perfectly strong enough. But if I want the top of that to all be in plane and flat, using something to aid in keeping those aligned can be very helpful to achieve that. You know, dowels can do that, dominoes can do that, lots of things can do that. So that's kind of the three things that we're going to talk about and break down. Is they can serve as a clamp, aid in alignment, or they can be joinery, lend strength. And often that goes into where in a long grain glue joint like the panel is very strong. But if we do, say, a butt joint, end of wood, like this 90-degree kind of stuff, normally not strong with just glue, so we need something. So those are sort of the three areas we're going to talk about when we break into, I feel like I'm just rambling. Criterion? No. Aspects? No. Products, services, no. Functions, three functions. Okay, so as we're talking about these, those are sort of the three functions they can serve, and they don't necessarily all serve all of those, which is gonna become a differentiating factor in determining which is right for not just your project, but that specific application and that specific project. Sometimes domino might be awesome, a dowel might be awesome, biscuits might be fine, pocket screws might be fine, or all of them fine or none of them fine. Whatever. So let's start with dowels first. So they can obviously aid in alignment because it's going to go into two pieces of wood, and they do add strength because this is another member with grain going different to the direction the wood grain is flowing in your project. So we have that cross grain strength added. Let me grab some pieces of wood to aid demonstration. So if I'm doing a panel glue up, I can put this dowel in here as a cross section, and that would help make sure my top stays flush when I glue up. Also, because this grain's running this way and this grain's running the other way, it would add strength. It's not needed in a panel to add strength that way, but it would do that. But because it does add strength, let's say I'm doing a 90-degree joint, a butt joint, now I'm adding strength and making up for the fact that this is end grain, and I'm giving myself some long grain to long grain glue surface, and it would also aid in alignment here. What this doesn't do is serve as any type of clamping or securing function. So if I'm using dowels, I also need to put clamps on this to help hold things together until that glue dries. I wouldn't want to leave this loose. The big advantage of dowels and doweling jigs is doweling jigs are very cheap. This is one I modified actually because I had some really thick stock, so I wanted to get it down to the middle of the wood. I want to say normally pick these up for like around 20 bucks, all kinds of varying quality. This is a Rockler one that's milled aluminum or something, pretty heavy duty. You can also make one in the shop really easy, so it's very inexpensive. You know, you can buy bags of dowels quite inexpensively. You probably have a drill bit the right size laying around the shop, so there's almost no expense to get into this, but it's not particularly fast. You have to drill both sides of both holes, and to me the real downside about doweling jigs, especially if you're trying to do a long surface where I have to reposition this, is then your placement becomes critical because these holes are not very oversized. They're quite snug to the dowel. So on both sides, your alignment has to be perfect, because let's say this hole's perfectly aligned, but on this spacing, the holes on this 2-piece wood were maybe a little bit closer than they were on this one, you're gonna have a really hard time bringing these together because it requires near perfect alignment. So to me, that's kind of a downside with dowels, but if you don't have a whole lot of funds to play around with in the shop and you want something that does work as joinery, this will do it. The other thing that's kind of a downside with dowels, I always say 1 point, be that nails, screws, dowels. 1 point is just a pivot. So if you don't want things to be able to swing around, you pretty much always have to do 2 dowels. So that's slowing you down because now I've got to do 4 holes just to secure one thing that doesn't move. That's also why most dowel jigs always have 2 holes in it. So that way you don't have to worry about repositioning as much. You only have to get 1 alignment to get 2 holes in, put it on the other side, 2 holes, done. So yeah, that's dowels. Next up, on sort of the more budget-friendly side of things, we have pocket screws. Super handy. Here's a trick though, these don't necessarily aid in alignment. You have to hold your pieces in alignment before you put your screw in, and also because these go in at an angle, they actually have a tendency to want to pull themselves out of alignment. So normally when you're putting these in, you want to have everything clamped to a flat surface or just clamped together, so that way when this screw, you know, goes through these members at an angle, what it wants to do is actually pull one of them down. So it wants to pull them out of alignment. And normally that's not something you want because then you have a big hump you've got to sand down and it's not flat. So you got to keep these clamped as you're driving this screw. But here's the thing, once you get that screw in there, everything is good. And now you can remove the clamp, and let's say we got some glue here, or this is a favorite technique I like to use. Let's say we've used a dowel or a domino, but we don't have a ton of clamps. Instead of having to, you know, long clamp this, I just have to make sure these 2 faces stay the same. I can run a pocket screw in there with my dowel or domino. And now this pocket screw serves as my clamp until my glue dries, and I have additional strength added from the domino or dowel. It's kind of a handy thing that you can do with pocket screws. On the speed side, pocket screws are a lot faster than dowels, and because you only use the jig to drill the hole on one side of the wood, you don't have to worry near as much about precision alignment. Your precision alignment comes in when you're arranging things before you put the screws in. And the nice thing is, like I said, you can clamp them in position to make sure everything's right where you want it. Really take your time lining things up and then drive your screws in. Whereas with dowels, you know, when you're setting that jig and then if you mess up, it's just a pain in the butt. So pocket screws have a lot going for them. Kind of the downside though, you know, got to keep them clamped, but also strength. They're not near as strong as these other options, and also they're not concealed. Your dowels and dominoes and biscuits will be concealed inside the joint in the wood because it's all like internal stuff, so you never see it. But your pocket screws leave a big gaping oval hole, which you can plug, but that's just additional steps. Although they're super handy for doing cabinet construction, because you can almost always put this on a face that's going to be hidden and never seen. So that's just something to bear in mind. If it's going to be visible, you're going to be spending time plugging, and then even after you plug it, that might still be something that sticks out if you're sticking with a natural finish. But let's say if you're going to do like a paint, it's going to be hidden. So yeah, inexpensive, can serve as a clamp, adds some strength, not as much as the others, doesn't really aid in alignment. You've got to keep it aligned as you work through pocket screws, but very inexpensive. There's a whole variety of jigs. I really like this one for when things are not yet assembled. And then there's another nice plus for pocket jigs is, let's say sometimes you've put something together, things aren't just quite right, or you missed a step and you just know you need some extra reinforcement somewhere, or you need to add a piece in place and you can't, you know, add some other joinery. There's a lot of small pocket hole jigs that you can use to just put in a little pocket screw or a pocket hole ahead of time and then add additional strength, squeeze a piece in somewhere in ways that other joinery doesn't work. I've ran into that case several times in projects where it's like, I need to reinforce this or add another piece, and my only real option is, well, I've got this little pocket hole jig. I can set it in there, drill a hole, run a screw, plug it, and we're good. Otherwise, to do anything else, I'd have to rip the whole project apart to add dowels, dominoes, a hand-cut joinery, something. This is my little example of a biscuit, so you can have a visual representation. Like I said, there's 2 kind of tiers of biscuit joiner. When you're spending $100, $200 or less, or getting your used ones, they're very limited and they're primarily used for alignment, not for strength. So the ideal is this is just a little wedge that would be more perfectly rounded. And you have a dude that looks kind of like a domino, but it spins a circular cutter head. And then you put that against your piece, plunge it, and it makes a little oval cutout. You do that on both sides, and then you can take this piece, you know, and wedge it in there. It would then be hidden, and it would serve the purpose of alignment like a dowel. However, these are often made out of softwood and quite thin, so they don't really add much strength. I mean, in a panel it does add some strength, but if we're trying to use like a small one, smaller than this obviously, and doing like a 90-degree joint, it's not adding enough that I would feel confident with that joint alone and not some other type of heavier reinforcement. That's on the lower end. Once you get up to the $600, $800, $1,000 biscuit cutters and the biscuits they make and their joinery systems, then you are talking about biscuits you can use for all different kinds of joinery that can be knocked down, etc. Those do exist. It's competitive to the Domino, and in that case, those biscuits and their systems tend to be less expensive, although I don't think you get the same amount of strength. So whereas with like the big Domino, I have a 14mm Domino, this is a whopper, super thick. You're not gonna get a biscuit that thick, but for most regular furniture use, you can get absolutely enough strength. Now on the low end, my issue and why I don't even consider these very great for alignment is the amount of slop involved for their tolerances. In my case, every time I try to use biscuits to help a panel get glued up, there was still so much slop involved that I would still put cauls and clamps on it to hold everything flat. So it's like, why did I spend all that time cutting all those grooves, putting in all these dominoes and gluing them, just to then have to caul and clamp this anyways to be flat? If that was supposed to make it flat and it didn't, why bother? So that's why you'll never see me using a biscuit joiner, because I haven't heavily invested in a really nice one, because I found a decent deal on a used Domino instead. And so if I need that, I use this. Or normally I'll just use a piece of wood and a clamp to hold things flat. Works great. So biscuits, they're there, but on the low end, I honestly don't think they're worth it. If you want to invest in one of the really nice systems as an alternative to a Domino, that's definitely an option. And then you can get the strength, so you can add strength. You can use it as an alignment tool, obviously. Gluing, actually they have connector systems, so they could be a clamp substitute, because you can use some of these as a strength and then use their plastic ones that have little screws to pull things together, and they act as a clamp substitute, kind of like connectors. So it can kind of do all of them. Downside is though, you're going to be spending a lot for that system, so that's not your budget system. That's more of a very prosumer, you know, this is a pretty aggressive side hustle, or I'm a professional woodworker. It's not the I'm just starting out dabbling like dowels or pocket screws would be, or deceptively that inexpensive biscuit joiner that in my experience is probably just gonna frustrate you. Just avoid them, find a different technique. And now for the one YouTube tends to really put on a pedestal, and that's the Festool Domino. What makes this so special is it's basically a router that wiggles, is all it is. And there's quite a few people out there that have made jigs where you take a router and do exactly the same thing, less expensive. What makes this so darn convenient though are a few things. Because we're making ovals instead of circles, this is not a pivot point. So if I put even just one of these dudes, of course I'm using the real big one, but it shows better on camera, in here, obviously I didn't just create a rotational point, a pivot, whereas just one dowel does. And many times I can get away with a single domino. I don't always have to double these up. The other nice thing is alignment. So whereas I have to make my holes the size of these dowels and make sure they align perfectly. And with that, with the biscuit, there tends to be a little bit of slop, so your alignment doesn't have to be perfect, but you're trading all that ease with alignment with sacrifice strength, basically, the way these work. With the Domino, there's a dial here, gives me different width settings. So the smallest one is going to perfectly fit my Domino. Then I can go a little bit bigger, and then my hole's gonna be slightly larger than my Domino. So what I generally do is on one side of the boards, everything will be tight, and then on the other side of a panel, everything will be a little bit wider, a little looser. So now I don't have to worry about all my holes on both sides. Like let's say I'm going to add reinforcement here, 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 which is way too much on this kind of thing. But with the doweling jig, all of these holes have to be perfectly spaced on both sides. With the Domino, I do tight here and loose on this side. And now I have a little bit of slip and slide factor in all those loose mortises. Because we call these dominoes, basically this is pre-existing technology that you could do by hand called a loose mortise and tenon joint. It's a mortise and tenon joint, but the tenon is loose. So yeah, those two things combined, the fact that this is oblong, so it's not a pivot point, and that I can have a tight setting and a looser setting, is the magic that makes the Domino so fast and convenient. Because now I can very quickly align, only, you know, have to do half as many holes necessarily as I do with this, and there's just more fudge factor involved. Combined with the fact that it's just a very well-made machine that's very accurate. You know, I can do this thing, bevel it at angles. It has a whole lot of positive stops. You know, I've got positive stops for everything, for the depth, for the plunge, for the position, for the angle. And they have, you know, two versions of this, the smaller one for smaller dominoes, and then the Mac Daddy that goes up to 14 millimeter, these big honking guys. And you can also get an adapter to run the small bits in a big one. So if you just want to buy one, you can just use the big one, but it can be overwhelming. And that's the Domino. Obviously, the downside of this is it is very expensive. I want to say right now, and they're about to raise prices again, the DF500, the small one's running, I guess I should just look that up. Okay, the smaller domino with the normal attachments is going for $1,200, and the larger domino with the normal attachments that go with it is going for about $1,700. Contrast that with one of the nicest Kreg pocket hole jigs on the market right now. This is the 720 Pro, and I've got the wings and stuff for storage that go with it, and extra support was $130. And also screws compared to dominoes are also a lot less expensive, but this is a full substitute for even hand-done joinery. So in places where you might be doing mortise and tenon by hand or with a router or dovetailing, etc., you don't have to do any of that once you have a domino. All of this is about increasing speed. This increases speed the most, and that's one of the reasons it costs the most, because it's very well made, but it's one of the most efficient, fastest ways to up production. And if you're doing this for a living or trying to make money off of it, the longer it takes you to make that project, either you have to charge more, which means you have a narrower client base, or you need to be able to do it faster, because otherwise the longer it takes you, the less money you're making for your time. So whatever you can invest in to decrease your time increases your profit, assuming you're selling things at the same price point. There comes a point, if you're trying to make money woodworking, that the premium tools pay for themselves in the money they return you, whereas if you're just doing it for funsies, maybe it's not necessarily, but my kind of counterpoint to that is if you're doing this for funsies, you probably have limited time to spend working on your projects, and if you don't want them to drag on forever, if you have the funds to spend, obviously if you don't, you know, don't go into debt or anything, but if you have the funds to spend and you want to be able to move through things faster in your shop, getting those premium tools like premium sanders, a domino, a drum sander, wider planers, all that kind of stuff can enhance the experience and move you through your projects faster so you can get more for your time. But if you just enjoy the flow, like being in the shop, don't care how fast you get things out, you're not shorted in any way in your projects by not having the premium stuff, and you can still do great work with dowels, with a biscuit joiner even, with a pocket screw jig, with just a hand tool and chisels and a few clamps. So don't let what you have or don't have here ever feel like that limits you in what you can do or the quality of work you can produce. It's simply a matter of how fast you're able to get that work done. But of course, if you like spending time in the shop, you probably like spending money on the things you spend time in the shop with. So hopefully this was informative to you of what you need or don't need. Anyway, if you're the kind of person who likes to like, comment, share, if you want to add something to this conversation you feel I missed or have a view I didn't get out there, please add it so I can check it out and everyone else can too. And all those things go a long way in helping it make sense for me to take the time to make these videos instead of just making projects for my clients. If you aren't the kind of person to like, comment, and share, that's cool. I'm glad you came and viewed. Thank you for spending some time with me, and I hope you learned something, were inspired, or at least entertained, if nothing else. And until next time, make time to make something. That was super talky, but hopefully it's good information.
Super talky, but it was good information.
Hope that made sense.
Hope that made